Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on Morning Line. Nick Beres here on a Tuesday. Got a good show on tap for you. I invite you to join in the conversation as we're going to be getting more deeper into the issue of domestic violence. And of course, it's against this entire backdrop that we've been talking about for the last several weeks. It seems there's a new development every other day. Of course, we had the whole Ray Rice debacle. That, frankly, continues with some of the developments at the NFL level. And then, of course, Adrian Peterson. The difference there, one dealing with a spouse or a girlfriend. Adrian Peterson now talking about the issue involving his child and how the NFL handles it. But we're not so much just talking about NFL and if they're right or wrong in all this, but we're going to try to look at what's happening there and see if that's a reflection of our attitudes here. And I want to know what you think should be done in these cases. We're also going to show you a story that I did yesterday, which is just crazy about how innocents can be injured in these domestic violence skirmishes. There was a case yesterday where a woman in the domestic with her boyfriend, who is the father of her child. The child's there on a bed behind them. They get into it. She feels as though maybe she's being threatened. She pulls a gun. She ends up shooting the guy. Goes right through his groin, the bullet, right through him, and then hits the baby that's asleep over here right in the rear. Both of them have to go to the hospital, and it's lucky no one died. We'll show you that. We'll get into it. And then open up the phone lines at 737-7587 to just get the very latest take from you on how this should be handled and what you think. And we're going to talk about it with an expert, not just me. With us this morning is Pat Shea. She's the CEO of the YMCA here in Middle Tennessee in Nashville.
YWCA.
I mean, did I say YMCA?
That's okay.
I'm a member of the YMCA, but it's the YWCA, and that's why I said when she sat down, when we start this, for those of you, we've all heard of the YWCA, but give them a little primer on exactly, why you're in a position to be here to talk about domestic violence through the YWCA.
Sure. The YWCA has been around for 116 years.
Okay.
And our mission is really eliminating racism and empowering women. We do all kinds of things to help women move from safety to self-sufficiency. Mm-hmm. What we really want is all women to be safe and then find their way to be able to manage their own lives. So a huge part of our budget, half of my budget, is related to domestic violence services.
And when you say services, I mean safe houses, all that kind of stuff?
Everything. We start with a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week crisis line that we answer constantly, 4,000 to 5,000 calls a year from women and men who have questions. We have a 51-bed shelter that is full, unfortunately, almost every night.
It is full
almost
all the time.
Every single night. We did in excess of 16,000 nights of stay last year.
Wow.
400 children and women.
What's the average length of stay?
Probably about 30 days. Women come in and they can bring their kids under the age of 18, boys and girls, and they can stay for 45 days. It's really an opportunity for them to become safe and put a plan in place.
This is a safe location. I mean, it's
safe,
secret.
Confidential.
Media doesn't know, and if we did know, we wouldn't put it on the air. It's supposed to be so that the spouse can't find them.
Exactly. Right. So confidentiality is a big part of our security plans. We also have 20 transitional housing units, so 20 residential rental properties that we make available to women who really want to get out permanently but need more time to finish their education, get their job, get their kids in another school, and sort of develop a support system in a community so that when the YW pulls out, they can stay. We do a lot of community outreach. Probably we talk to over 10,000 adults and children every year about domestic violence, elder abuse, and other things.
And I know the YW and a lot of other organizations do that all the time.
Yes.
And yet it baffles me some of the attitudes we still see out there. It's as though people aren't listening. Or I don't know what the attitude, why some people respond to some of these cases we see at the NFL level and elsewhere. It's not just the NFL, but why?
Well, I would first start with it's a lack of knowledge.
How do you have a lack of knowledge on this? I mean, you have to be extraordinarily ignorant to have no knowledge of domestic violence. I mean, I don't get it. Where's the lack of knowledge? Give me an excuse for the meatheads that miss this.
People don't understand how complex domestic violence is, so they don't get that it's not about you're hurting me, so I need to leave, or that it's not my fault. Those are the two things that I see constantly. Women go and judge other women and say, why didn't you leave him? Or how could you have done something so bad that he would need to hurt you? I was with an executive here in Nashville of a big healthcare company, and we were talking about a recent homicide, and his question to me was, what did she do to deserve that. So those two are examples of a complete lack of knowledge about the complexity of domestic violence.
Now that's more complex. I wasn't really referring to that. I'm just talking about what appears to be, to some degree, the tolerance for the perpetrator. Okay, I think and it is more complex to understand the thinking of the victim when they're caught in this horrible cycle. And that, I understand your point. But the tolerance that appears to be there, certainly if you happen to be able to carry a football well and score a touchdown, which is ridiculous. But, you know, the tolerance for the act itself, for the person who does it, that's what I don't get. There's no gray area there. End of story. Violence, period. All right? You punch, you hit, you're wrong.
That's exactly correct.
You're wrong. I mean, who misses that?
Well, there's always the lunatic fringe in our society that don't, you know, comprehend it, want the attention, want to be shown on national television with Ray Rice jerseys on.
Yes, and you're right, and I like the way you phrase it, lunatic fringe, because that's exactly what it was. Now, I wonder, the case that's come up more recently with Adrian Peterson, the running back for the Vikings, and he's been reinstated. He's going to play this weekend after sitting out one game. There's a line, too. Now, Peterson and some others have said, well, look, I was disciplining my child the way I was disciplined as a child. And who knows, maybe he was whipped just as badly.
Yes.
And where is the line? And there's pictures of Peterson, the best running back in the league. And if you think for a second they're going to sit this guy because he can help them win, it's not going to happen. But where do you draw the line again? And I've asked this many a time on this program, between, you know, some people spanking or physical discipline is part of their way of life. And I think it can be okay in some instances, depending on how you do it. Where's the line? It's not supposed to hurt. It's not supposed to leave any marks. What's the line?
You know, I don't know that I could state that for the world. I'm probably not an expert in child abuse, but what I do know is his comment about that was how he was raised is a frequent comment we hear about domestic violence. A lot of men who abuse come back and say, that was how my father behaved.
That's all they knew.
That was what I saw happen to my grandmother. And so in solving the problem of domestic violence, retraining, re-educating folks about what is love, how to show affection, what's appropriate behavior, because we all go back to what we were taught. We all go back to what we learned as children if no one else gives us a new idea or a new concept. Chris Sanders spoke at the YW just recently.
Former Titan.
Former Titan, great man, just doing wonderful community service. And he talked about a situation with his sister being abused by a boyfriend. And when he pulled the boyfriend off, the boyfriend said, this is what I was taught to do. This was how I was taught to manage my woman. And so there's a lot of relearning that needs to happen in our society as it's related to domestic violence, abuse, and probably how we deal with children.
Yeah, okay. Well, listen, we're going to open up the phone line, 737-7587. Your take on, and before we get to some of those calls, just the Ray Rice angle, and I wanted you to address the one aspect of it where we've heard after the fact that there have been some including women, who have said, well, listen, you know, this wouldn't have happened if she had not, I guess we've heard reports, spit on him first or lashed out with, you know, a punch herself initially. Whether she initiated it or not, does it matter? No,
it doesn't matter. And the typical domestic violence case looks just like the Ray Rice case. There is a disruption or a fight, and it doesn't matter who starts it, but he ended it. He has the physical power, and he is in control of that relationship. So what we saw on television is what's happening in homes across the United States. How it started, who started it is really not relevant. Nothing she did deserved that.
Okay, so it's a matter of who ends it, or because he was so much bigger and strong. I mean, you could almost say if it was the other way around, because we keep looking at the sexuality here, a man hitting a woman, okay, but just as easily if this had been a man and they had kind of just, you know, shoved each other a little bit, and then a woman had picked up a 2x4 and just cocked him across the head, boom. I mean, that would be
just as bad.
Just as bad, because domestic violence can go both ways, but we all know that it's women that are predominantly the victims.
Predominantly violence against women is perpetrated by men. And domestic violence is not rooted in violence. Domestic violence is rooted in control and power. So when you look at that relationship, who has the control, who has the power, and those are the ones that they're the batterers, the ones that are in control of the relationship. So frequently when the police go to a domestic violence situation, even here in Nashville, there's been mutual pushing and shoving, but The question is, who's running that show? Who is telling the other person how to be, how to act, what to do? And that's really why domestic violence is so complicated. One adult is controlling another adult, and what we talk a lot about is it's through violence, but there can be control in many other ways.
We'll get into that. But before we go to our first break, let's squeeze in a call or two as the lines are open. Your opinions as you can sound off on this, and we'll go to Scott. Scott, good morning.
Morning.
Hey, Scott, go ahead.
Well, not everybody comes from an abused family, that raises up to be someone who would hit a woman. I hit my wife about 10 years ago, and I regretted it to this day, But it's not just a hitting problem for a man, There's lots of people in other relationships that are passive-aggressive, and an aggressive person does not get along with a passive-aggressive person. And it's not a problem that'll ever be solved 100%, other than what the woman on TV said. Everybody has to be educated about it.
That's right. That's exactly right. Education is the ultimate solution.
And Scott, how did you handle it then after the fact? I mean, I assume it hasn't happened since, but you just...
I was in the military, and I needed to take anger management classes. It's hard to drop your military persona when you get home.
Sure.
And so... and they can say they don't strike in the military these days, but that's incorrect. The whole place is just an abusive nightmare, and then you come home. I was raised perfect. I didn't have any abusive parents or anything. And when you're in the military, you come home, and it's hard to drop your abusive attitude, depending on what you do in the service.
Listen, that interesting. Before we go to the break, I'm really glad you brought that point up. I was wondering. Now, I think we all know, if we've studied this at all, that domestic violence can span society as a whole, socioeconomic, all those.
That's exactly
Do you think there's anything to what he says, that perhaps individuals that are working in a more violent or aggressive field, be it military coming back from whatever training they have to deal with, or is there a higher incidence of domestic among, say, NFL football players because they basically work in a violent field? Do you think there's any link to that at all, one way or the other? Or is it probably, would you guess, about the same as it is for other occupations?
I think it's pretty much the same. We don't have real data that shows us that any one occupation, any one race, any one age is more likely to be a batterer. And, there's a lot of misunderstanding that things cause abuse that really are not connected. But we do know that 15 million children are witnessing domestic violence every day, and we know for certain that being part of a domestic violence situation as a child will increase the likelihood that you will experience it as an adult.
Yeah. Makes sense. All right. On that note, we'll take a break. When we come back, if you're on hold, stay there. If you want to join in the conversation, the number is 737-7587. We're talking about domestic violence and a lot more to touch on some of these cases, and your thoughts on whether or not these football players should be playing. And, of course, they're all charged, the ones that are, and are innocent until proven guilty. But should there be, and I'll ask our guest as well, whether or not they should be playing while these cases are pending. We'll take a break and be back with more right after this. All right, we're back on Morning Line. Thanks for joining us on this Tuesday, talking about domestic violence, as you see, against the backdrop of everything that's most recently happening with the NFL. With us this morning is Pat Shea. She's the CEO of the YWCA here in Nashville and Middle Tennessee area. Nice to have you on.
Thanks.
And, I hope this hasn't become tiresome for some of our viewers, since they've seen so much media coverage of this.
But
to me, there's always a new step over the last 2 or 3 weeks. As I said, Adrian Peterson's going to play this weekend. The Vikings reversed their decision. And again, I know you deal a lot with battered women, but children also are victims in this. And the question is, Adrian Peterson, Ray Rice, they're all innocent until proven guilty when they've been charged with a crime, all right? And so the question is, shouldn't they be allowed to continue their occupation until it's adjudicated? Or does it send the wrong message when you allow them to play? I mean, could they suspend them with pay?
Yes.
And say, what do you think? In general, of anyone?
Well, I'm the CEO of the YWCA, and if I was having an issue with an employee, especially an issue of this severity, they would not be at the YW. I would probably have them leave with pay until it was resolved.
Okay.
And so if I was the head of the NFL, or if I owned a football club, I would be embarrassed to allow somebody with that kind of criminal accusation represent me until it was fixed. So I probably would suspend him with pay until it was resolved.
Well, that's a way to do it, just to play it safe, because so many people watch. What do you worry about by allowing Adrian Peterson to play? And there have been some new reports coming out now just in the last 24 hours that there was a prior case, I think in Texas, where we don't know how it played out, but DCS, their version of DCS had been brought in, and another one of his children had suffered some head injuries from an alleged beating. So what kind of message does it send if he is allowed to play this weekend?
But what we worry about is money.
Yeah, it's just about money, right?
I think so. I think it doesn't really bode well, because I have a son. I raised a son. He looks up to all those players. They're his role models, his rock stars. And I think we need to hold men and women who have that kind of clout, that kind of position, to a higher level of integrity. And so if questionable behavior, especially with evidence, is out there, then I think we should ask ourselves, what makes us look good? What makes the owner of that football team look good? What makes me as the CEO of the YW? How do I protect the image of the organization I represent? And I think it's asking someone to step out while the process is being followed to see whether or not the charges are accurate.
It would just be mind-boggling if Adrian Peterson on his own said, you know what? I want these questions answered. I understand the concern out here right now. I, with pay, am going to voluntarily say I'm not playing because I don't want to send the wrong message. I feel bad about what I did. We're going to go through this process. Of course, that in a million years won't happen.
But
wouldn't it be cool if someone had the guts to step up? Because, I've seen some of his apologies, and I believe in his case, I don't know what really went down, but I do believe some of his heartfelt apologies, like he said, this is the way I was treated. I was just trying to discipline. I don't think he really realizes that it appears as though he probably went way too far in these cases. But gosh, it would be great if he would just step away. Now, we're going to get to the phone calls here again in a moment, but real quickly, wanted to ask you, and you wanted to touch on the idea of women staying in some of these cases. And going to the Ray Rice case, I mean, we see in this video getting cold cocked, okay? And then she marries the guy. Okay, and we were both talking during the break that's very unlikely that Ray Rice's wife suffered that knockout blow for the first time right there, that he likely had touched her in the past. Likely.
Yes.
We don't know of any incidents, but wouldn't you say, based on across the board, a lot of times that's not the first time something like this happened.
In a domestic violence relationship, violence usually occurs after some other things have occurred. So there's usually emotional and mental abuse, and it sort of builds into violence. Not always, but frequently. And when you watch that video, the casualness with which he slaps her and then drags her out of the elevator, if you had for one opportunity, like Scott said, hit my wife once, you would be appalled and floored, and you would be picking her up, you'd be apologizing, you'd be doing something.
Exactly. I would have been stunned, like, oh my gosh, she's unconscious on the floor.
And watching him drag her out was almost the worst part of the video.
It was.
Because of a complete lack of respect for that woman.
Okay, so your take not only has she married him, and here's the video, of course, that we've all seen about a zillion times, but she not only has married him now, but she's also been outspoken in her defense of him after the fact, and angry at the media coverage of this since this latest video was made public.
So I am not the wife of Ray Rice.
And you never would be.
And I never would be.
Wouldn't put up with that.
However, I worry about her.
Yeah.
What we know about this situation is she's probably in more danger today than she's ever been. 75% of domestic violence homicides occur when a woman says she's going to leave. So does this woman have any opportunity to leave at this moment? I doubt it. If he would do that to her in an elevator in public, what might he do to her in their home?
But it's such a public spectacle now. You're right. And a lot of times, but right now, there's such a microscope on that relationship. If she were to say tomorrow, I'm done with you, and be very public about it and say, I'm leaving, and everyone's watching, and the media would be all over this. I would think, at least maybe because of that, it wouldn't protect him if he just snapped and went after her, I suppose. But I'm just saying, now would be, like a lot of women, they're private, they're alone, they're isolated, and they're afraid, and this guy figures no one's going to care if I kill you now. In this case, if she were to choose to leave now, I think she'd be safer than someone who was completely isolated and alone. And she would be surrounded instantly by such a core group of people because this is such a high-profile case.
Okay, so two things.
So I'm wondering if there's another reason she's staying.
Two things
like
that you
money?
need to think about. Well, number one, how many domestic violence situations end in a homicide-suicide?
Oh, well, yeah.
So here we've taken
Murder-suicide,
a young man who's lived his whole life for this career that he had. Now we've stripped him of that career. We've made a public spectacle. He is backed into a corner. And so when you back someone into a corner, they're desperate. So if she walked out, now the last piece of his integrity, the last piece of his reputation, I mean, when was it? Just a few years ago we had the homicide-suicide with a football player, and that's not an atypical ending to a domestic violence situation.
So she may be staying because she fears to leave?
I would think she's terrified. I would think she is terrified about what he could do.
Wow.
Now that's my guessing. I have not had a conversation with her.
Right.
The other thing is she probably loves him in some way. There was a whole vision, a whole future that she might still be clinging to. If not the Ravens, maybe the Titans. Somebody might pick him up. So there's this future that might still happen. She has a child with him, so she's dependent on him for some income, for some support. There's so many reasons that could be going through that woman's mind. But I actually talked to a batterer that came through the YW Domestic Violence Shelter who married the man after the abuse started. And I said, you know, how can we help you? What can we do? And she told our staff that it was easier to marry him than to leave him. So think about how dysfunctional that is when it's easier to marry than it would be to leave, because you're so afraid that he will carry out the threats that he has been ranting and raving for the whole course of the relationship.
All right, let's take some more calls. All right, we've got a lot of people with thoughts on this. We'll go to Monique. Hi, Monique.
Hi.
Good morning. Go ahead.
Okay. I think this is wrong with the Ray Rice incident, but I wonder why is this particular case the chosen one? Because this is not the first time an NFL player has been abusive towards his significant other. We've even had Titans players, from what I recall, do the same thing. Is it just because we have video footage that, you know?
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. You hit it on the head. It's only because of video. It's no better or worse, but if there's video, it changes everything.
And the video was so horrific.
Only because the public gets to see it, and it's horrific, and so it really hits a nerve, whereas hearing it or reading a police report, I mean, it just doesn't cover the same weight, even though it's every bit as bad. So, I mean, you hit it on the head. That's exactly why, Monique. It's really the video.
Yes.
Yeah.
I cringe when I see the video, but I just don't understand why no one has said anything about any Titans players. I have yet to hear that on any TV show here in Nashville.
Okay, and well, I'm not familiar if there's recent cases of that right now. It's not something we're going to cover up if we catch wind, but I haven't heard of any recent cases involving Titans players. And so, you know, you can always go back in history and look throughout the NFL of these cases. But yeah, the video, I've said more than once that had Michael Vick been caught on video electrocuting or torturing these dogs and that had gone public, he would not be in the league right now. But because it wasn't video and it's hard to imagine everything, yeah, he did jail time and he was out of the league, but he's back playing right now. Video, there wasn't video in his case.
Exactly correct. I think the video changed the whole conversation.
Right.
It made it not a private issue, it made it a public issue, and all of the conversation about did it really happen and questioning her is gone because we saw it.
And look at the difference with Adrian Peterson. We have seen some photographs of the result of his spanking of his child made public, but had there been video of him going to town on this child with a switch, he'd be done. But there is not video of it. These photos are bad enough. I'm sorry, Mary, what did you say? Hey, we'll take a quick break. When we come back, if you're on hold, promise you, we'll get to a bunch of your phone calls right after this. We are back on Morning Line. Our guest with us this morning is Pat Shea. She's CEO of the YWCA here in Nashville, Mid-State region. And obviously, YW does a lot of very good work trying to help women get out of these deadly situations and support and to educate, which is one reason she's here. Thanks for coming on today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
We had some people who waited through the break, so we'll take a few more calls here. And the lines are open, 737-7587 on Ray Rice, Adrian Peterson, domestic violence. Joe, good morning.
Good morning, Nick.
Hey, Joe.
If this wasn't a sports figure, and we're talking about big money here, that's what controls the sports nowadays. You probably wouldn't even be hearing about this, but this has been going on for quite a while. They just like you say, the video brought this one out, but Michael Vick shouldn't even be playing football today, and several other ones. You got one guy that's doing an analyst job now that played for the Ravens, Ray Lewis. He killed a guy down in Atlanta, Georgia. So, you know, I mean, you're talking about big money here. Roger Goodell in the last 4 years made $104 million. This McDonald guy, they set him out of game, or was going to set him out of game. I was going to pay him $750,000.
Yeah, for the Niners, right? He played in the game, didn't he?
Right.
Yeah. Now, well, you're right. It's money. Now, Ray, he was talking about Ray Lewis. He was never convicted of anything. There was a situation where he was there at the Super Bowl and someone got killed in the vehicle, and he was under a cloud for a while.
Right.
But he was never convicted and cleared of all that. But I understand what he's saying. Now, you hear the owners saying Roger Goodell, the NFL commissioner, is still in good standing. People are calling for him to maybe resign because he's pretty much bungled this thing.
He has.
And that really surprised me. I thought he was a little more sensitive to this kind of stuff. I mean, he's got a wife, daughter, things like this. I mean, goodness gracious, how could you be so blind? Even if he has internally maybe turned a blind eye to it, doesn't he know the damage this is doing to the league he runs? Mm-hmm. I mean, if you're talking about money, he's blown it.
He has.
But the stadiums are still full.
Actually, they very much are. And that's what I think people need to ultimately do, is they need to vote with their feet. They need to decide where to put their money and who to support. Mm-hmm. And, this situation has been going on for quite some time. Our society lets bad guys who are held up for whatever reason, their athletic prowess, their intellectual capability, their money, we've let bad guys get away with stuff that other men might not have been able to slide back from so easily. And you know what I think this does is it says no one should be allowed to hurt a woman. No one should be allowed to hurt a child, and that's a law.
Yeah.
I think the other thing, and I mentioned it earlier, domestic violence is not a private issue. People believe that what occurs between a woman and her husband is between them, and I'm saying it is an issue that society needs to deal with. If someone burned down your house, would that be a private issue? If someone robbed you, would that be a private issue? Why can you beat up somebody and have that be a private issue?
Like that's a private issue. And that's the very thing that Ray Rice's wife was saying in recent comments that she made about, this is a private thing, give us our privacy, I hate the coverage. I mean, I do. It makes me really wonder about her. Let's go to Mary. Mary, good morning. Got a couple Marys, actually. Mary, good morning. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hey, what's on your mind?
I have a boyfriend that calls me MF, bitch. I'm stupid all the time, and I'm trying to get away from him, but I felt sorry for him because he was from Mexico, away from his family, and I tried to help him. But my advice, I think that ball player is very violent, and I feel for her, and my son is in jail right now for beating up his wife, and I've witnessed him snapping, and it was horrible to think that my son would put his hands on his wife like that. It just hurts me. I am torn with 3 sons in jail, and it is very hard when they call me all the time. Send me money, mama. And I only live on SSI 720. I don't hardly have any money left for me. And, it's just horrible. Domestic violence is a very serious thing, and we do need, just think about Nicole Simpson that was murdered by O.J. I think it's very sad, and I think he was definitely guilty. I followed the whole story.
Sure.
And I think as a woman being battered by her husband for a previous marriage, and one of my boyfriends locking me in a bedroom and another Mexican, it's horrible because you lose your self-esteem. You don't trust women. You don't trust men. You want to stay in the house. You don't trust anybody. And I know it's very hard for me. I go to counseling now, but I hope and pray I'll soon be better. I take medication for anxiety, but sometimes I feel like just beating my boyfriend up, if you want to know the truth. He gets drunk, and I found out that the men in front of me sell cocaine, and he goes over there and gets high. And I think people that do cocaine, us women, are victims of violence.
Well, she just said a lot there, but
She said a lot.
I want to remind, that we talk about physical violence. She talked about the boyfriend she has now that verbally berates her.
Yes.
Now, talk about that and where that falls into the abuse pattern.
Well, Abuse comes in many forms. So there's verbal abuse, there's emotional abuse, there's sexual abuse, economics. That happens very, very frequently, that he is in control of all the money. There's physical abuse. There is just the continual threatening of, we had a woman who stayed at our shelter that her greatest fear was he would hurt her pets. And domestic violence and harming animals is very, very, very closely related. So abuse comes in many forms. And it's really important that women recognize that. I was with a woman last night who said she was in a bad marriage. He was very verbally abusive, called her fat, called her ugly, called her all sorts of things. And she never saw that while she was in the relationship as being abusive. But it tears at the fabric of her self-esteem. And it makes her unable to be what she can be as a mother, as a wife, as a daughter, as a contributor to society. So when someone is just constantly taking a piece from you in whatever form of weapon they choose, it's really all you can do is become about protecting yourself. And I just want to tell Mary, call our crisis line, 242-1199, 24 hours, 7 days a week. It's free. Women can call and talk to counselors. They can talk to crisis managers who will help them think about how to safety plan and how to manage all those relationships.
Yeah, she has her hands full.
She
But
has
that's
her
great.
hands
I'm glad
full.
you gave that number, and we'll give it out again before the end of the show. But 242-1199.
Call us
the YWCA.
any time of the day or night.
Excellent. All right, let's go. We've got Troy now. Troy, good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, Troy, what's on your mind?
Well, I was involved in, not domestic, but I got arrested for domestic abuse, and she hit her own self in the face for ashtray, and they arrested me for it, but the judge wouldn't let me say a word about it. I was at work when they come get me out, arrest me.
Yeah, I mean, and I hate when sometimes that happens. You know,
Me too.
These days it's such a hair trigger thing. It's scary. If a woman these days, unscrupulously perhaps, decides she really wants to nail you, all she has to do is say, "You hit me," and people are going to be all over her. There's got to be an investigation.
Right.
But in his case, you know, if someone whacks themselves in the face, I did a story a while back on a guy who was arrested and went through just a long and financially draining and bad ordeal where he was charged with, you know, kidnapping and assaulting a woman. Turned out to have all been made up. But he went through hell during that period. Now, that is the exception to the rule.
That is the exception
But
to the
I mean,
rule.
so the point is to protect against that. All these cases, as you see with the NFL, have to be investigated, right?
They do, and I know that there are occasionally situations like he mentioned, but most cases don't even get prosecuted. So what we still see is if there is a domestic violence situation and it does make the courts, I mean, it's one of the things Nashville's really working hard on, but still today most domestic violence cases get
are they settled, or are they not prosecuted because why?
Well, mostly not prosecuted, and a lot of times it's because the woman doesn't show up in court. I don't know if you're familiar, we just opened a new family justice center here in Nashville. It's an advocacy center. It's called the Gene Crow Advocacy Center, and it's a great change for Nashville. Before, a woman would show up in court and she would wait for hours to be able to speak, and she would be sitting with her batterer.
Okay.
So here I am, terrified for my life, and in order for me to stop you, I have to sit with you in a public location for hours until we're called in, and you're giving me that look
that's
that I know
ridiculous.
normally comes right before a beating. But today, the Gene Crow Advocacy Center is almost like a living room. You come, the women and men are protected. They're kept away from their batterer. They're kept comfortable, and they're allowed to breathe and relax and get prepared to go in. So getting women to show up for court is a big deal.
Yeah, but can't the DA still prosecute even if, and a lot of times the women decide, oh, wait, no, I don't want to press charges, right? But the DA can still push ahead with the charges whether the woman wants them to do it or not.
Is the example of Ray Rice.
Yeah.
They're going ahead anyways because they have evidence, and it's a crime against society.
And is it a lot more difficult to prosecute when the woman does not cooperate?
I bet it is. I've never done it,
I'm
but
guessing
I
it
bet
probably
it
is. But if you have the evidence, and obviously the video pretty much speaks for itself.
Plus the data speaks for itself. 1 in 4 women are victims of domestic violence. 51% of all crimes in our state are crimes against women, and they're crimes
50%?
51% of all crimes against a person in our state, not property crimes, but
against
abuse,
a person
are domestic violence related.
The domestic violence related
Domestic
in
violence
women.
related. And Tennessee is 10th in the nation for the rate at which men kill women. We've stayed in the top 10 my whole time at the YW. So think about what that says about the state of Tennessee. I sure wouldn't get married and move here. 10th in the nation.
For the number of men that are killing their spouses or women?
10th in the nation at the rate at which men kill women. And how they do all of that is a pretty complicated mathematical formula, but I think it speaks to a culture that supports violence.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask you, is why it might be at that level. And I'll let you answer that, and we'll take more calls. We've got to take a break. We'll be back with our final segment right after this. All right, back on Morning Line. Thanks for joining us. Our guest this morning is Pat Shea. She's CEO of the YWCA, and she's on here this morning, as you see on the screen there, talking about domestic violence. Like I said, it's curious with Adrian Peterson's going to likely play in the football game this weekend for the Vikings. If there was I'm a season ticket holder for the Titans, and if there was a Titans player that was just in the same situation as Adrian Peterson, the Titans made the call to play him this weekend, I would not go to the game. Now, that's me. Now, I paid money for these tickets, and you know what? They're not cheap. And the Titans are lousy right now. But besides that, I would not go. But I suspect in Minnesota, the vast majority of the fans are going to go. Now, I understand the rest of the team didn't do this, and I support the team. But I would not go making a statement that I disagree with that decision by them. But, man, do you understand fandom right now? And that most of the fans up there are just glad he's going to take the field.
Yes.
And they just kind of, whatever the reason. Seriously, homicide, I don't care. He beat his wife, he struck his child, I don't care. Score a touchdown for me. That really is the attitude among a lot of Twisted fans. And there's a lot of them. In fact, I might even guess it's the majority.
A lot of times with violence, in domestic violence in particular, until it affects you personally, it's not really real. So unless it's your sister or your mother or your girlfriend, not your girlfriend meaning that you were the batterer, but a friend of yours who was a woman, I think a lot of people just can say, well, domestic violence only happens in a certain world.
We all know women, and that's exactly what I do. I think about it, I say, gosh, that happened. If this happened to this person that was close to me, I'd be so upset. And so why should I be any less upset for that poor woman? And I'm going to let people know.
And your point is well taken. You don't have to look far to find a woman in your family or in your world who's been a victim of domestic violence. 1 in 4 women. So just ask a few of the women in your life, what's their experience, and have they ever been in a situation where they felt that they were being abused, battered, threatened, bullied, stalked? I mean, stalking has become a huge issue. And you'll see how close domestic violence really is to your own personal life. And I think when it becomes personal, maybe that's when people will be ready to stay home from the football game.
All right. Now, I want to talk about engaging men to reduce violence against women.
Good.
Go ahead.
We believe, the YW believes that is the solution.
Engaging men.
Engaging men. So the YW has been in domestic violence for 40 years.
Okay.
We've run a shelter, we've done all kinds of outreach, and we are great at our work. However, we know that we can't solve the problem. And about 3 years ago, we really started studying gender violence. There are people who've spent a life and understand the complexity of gender violence. Predominantly, it is men hurting women, but most men are good. It's really just a small portion of men that are misbehaving. And if men called other men out, if men held other men responsible and accountable, it could change the culture. So we really want 3 things. We want men to be aware of the statistics. We want you to realize that there are women in your life who are being impacted by violence against women perpetrated by men. We want you to see how you personally support and live in a culture that allows violence. Your point about not going to the football game is not how most men would vote. They would go to the game. What does that say about what you believe about violence? So how do you support a culture? What is it that you're doing that continues to objectify a woman or make a woman seem less valuable? Do you tell your son not to play like a girl? Do you call your son a sissy?
Right.
Yes. No, you wouldn't. But I know situations where men are holding young boys accountable to a masculine role model,
especially
that's
in sports,
completely inappropriate.
Yeah, no, you're right. Sometimes, and it's been around for so long.
It has been around for so long.
And it comes out and you hear it and maybe they don't even think twice about it. But and to say, you hit like a girl.
You hit like a girl.
Wow, think about that for a second.
What does that say about girls?
Well, yeah, like, okay, they're going to be weaker. They're going to be, yeah, it's a put down is what it is. To a man, it would be a put down.
It's a really, Tony Porter talked to a young man and said, what would you do if your coach said you were playing like a girl? And he said, I thought he'd be upset. I thought he'd be insulted. He said he would be devastated. devastated to be called something like a girl, and it starts young. I remember when my son was in sports and he got hurt, and I wanted to go down, and I wasn't allowed to go down, and he wasn't allowed to cry, and he was 10. He was 10. So how do you start to change that dynamic?
But it goes so much, this is interesting too, it's crazy, but all right.
What?
All right. In this country, and it's the tradition, and the vast majority, in fact, probably everyone watching, when we get married, you're taking my name.
Okay.
All right?
That's a
little
great
bit-
example.
I'm just saying.
That's a great example.
But I can tell you, I mean, I've gotten in this before. It just so happens that I'm married and my wife has her last name and I have my last name and I don't care, you know? But so many people, I hear so many of my friends getting married, I can't wait to take on his name or blah, blah. And sometimes I'll say, really, are you just that eager to just give up your name and get married? And I know this sounds crazy. I know a lot of you are like, Nick, it's tradition. What are you talking about? And if that's good for you and you want to give up your name, and that's fine. But that to me is almost where it starts. Why does the woman have to give up the name? I'm just asking this. And
Okay, but
I'm telling you, everyone out there is going like,
you've touched
right now.
on something really important because violence is supported by this concept of ownership.
Right, and you give up your name, become someone else's, they
have
own
a
you.
culture that sometimes believes that we are owned by the men we marry, that men are in control of us. Now, taking someone's name could be out of love and respect.
Sure,
and
that's what most would say.
Women get to do whatever they want. But what we have to remember is, everybody always says to me, what about the women? Why do the women do this? Why do the women do that? Women live in a society that's still controlled by men. Most men are the CEOs, most men are the congressmen and the senators. If you look at even preachers, they're predominantly men. So our culture is run by men, and women figure out how to succeed. So think of Ray Rice's wife. She figured out how to marry an NFL player. Think about what that means for the rest of her life. She's gorgeous, she's wealthy, she could possibly have a life that we all dream of. So I believe that when men change their behavior, when men really treat women as equal, women's behavior will change. Because we are acting out in a world that most of the time we're not in control of. Which I know sounds like a cop-out to some, but it isn't. Women will alter their behaviors when women and men are equal. When sexism is reduced, when the concept of property is completely removed from our dialogue, and when women aren't held up as objects solely for the pleasure of men.
Okay, but you do talk about the phrases like, all right, you hit like a girl. Well, isn't that just like a woman being asked to give up her last name when she gets married? Okay, why doesn't a man take her name out of love and respect?
Well, and some men do.
Okay.
I don't really think that taking a man's name is the same as putting down girls. It doesn't feel the same to me.
No, I think you're probably right.
And the one thing we never want to do is I want women to have choices, and I want men to have choices.
It seems like it kind of makes you give up your identity to some degree, because your name is part of your identity.
Well, that could be for some. It didn't affect me when I took my husband's name.
Yeah. And like I said, for the vast majority, I know very independent, strong-minded women just like yourself who do it, and it's fine. Yeah. It's just an interesting quirk as we talk about all this, that someone would have to. To me, sort of never occurred to me. I really don't care if my wife took my name. I just don't care. I am who I am. She is who she is. Que sera. Let's go to Charles. Charles, good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, Charles, go ahead.
One thing everybody's looking at it like a one-way street. They never think women can abuse a man, because I'm one of them that's been abused by women.
So you've been abused. Well, I think you acknowledged it's rare to some degree, but it happens, right?
It's the exception, and we provide services to men who've been victims of domestic violence. So one thing about the YWCA, that crisis line, 242-1199, men can call, and actually we had a male client this week. We don't put him in our shelter, but we have a shelter situation that we take men in, and we provide them the same services we provide women.
Can you imagine, though? I think there's probably a lot of men out there that maybe are in that situation. It's less that don't come forward. Because imagine the stigma attached. There's stigmas, period, with a woman. What she may get hit with, but I mean, a man coming forward. The stigma of saying I'm being abused, it takes a very strong man to be able to come forward and say that.
But that's one of the benefits of our engaging men, because I think raising this dialogue, everybody will be able to speak about that this is wrong. regardless of who's the batterer and who's the victim, it's wrong when one person controls another through violence or through whatever method they choose. So we want men to report. And I know there is a stigma, but it's really important that those people, especially in Middle Tennessee, know that we provide exactly the same services.
Yeah.
But predominantly victims of violence are women, and predominantly the violence is as a result of a man.
Okay. Now, I would suspect that while these instances are awful, what we've seen with the NFL, it does give us all an opportunity to be doing shows like this and for you to get this out. So hopefully something good comes out of what we're going through, right?
I believe that the national dialogue will greatly move this movement forward. And I already, at the YW, have had an outpouring of men who want to get involved.
Oh, really?
Yes,
okay.
because like we talked about a few minutes ago, most men are good men. Most men are like you or my husband, my son. Most men would never hurt anyone. And when they start to see that their involvement can change the whole landscape, when they start to see their responsibility to step up, I think men are looking for a way to stop this as much as women are.
Well, yeah, I hope you're right about that. And I hope as the season progresses and we get to the Super Bowl, I want to see if things have changed or if everything, has just kind of been moved on. And that was a chapter from earlier in the season, and we've gotten past this.
Well, we've had a number of educational workshops at the YW recently. Last week, we educated 300 Metro Public School coaches and resource officers on this idea.
The coaches of high school sports.
High school and middle school, and we were invited by Tony Majors, who's over all athletics for the public schools, and him. Chief Anderson.
Smart.
And they wanted us to get the coaches to understand how important they are. So what comes out of a coach's mouth impacts a boy in a way that his mother has totally lost at the age of 12 and 13 and 14. So if coaches take opportunities to really educate and change that dialogue with boys about their responsibility to women, it'll have an impact. One of the TSU coaches, Dana Ford, he's the head basketball coach for Tennessee State University. He has a policy that if you abuse women or girls in any form or fashion, you will lose your scholarship. And he is really clear with his players. You abuse, you lose. So when Coach Ford is saying that, those boys are listening.
That'll get their attention. Well,
that'll change the situation.
Right there alone is whatever happens from here on in. That's all been very positive. Listen, Pat, thank you for coming on.
It's been my pleasure.
A pleasure.
I know, I really enjoyed it.
We'll take a break, and when you come back, I'll have a programming note about tomorrow and the number again for the YWCA helpline. Stay with us.